for Dr. Stonsky. I'm very proud to say that in North Carolina, about 3 years ago, we did adopt the Massachusetts standards for our teacher preparation programs across North Carolina. And so what has happened is that since that time, our schools of education, working closely with the colleges of arts and sciences, have had to go into the deep processes of redesigning programs and looking at those standards at the higher education level. So we're making strides in that department. I'm very happy to say that.
In English or in other subjects, or
across
what?
all the subjects, for our elementary ed teachers, for our middle grades teachers, and which gets into our content areas and our secondary education teachers. So it's part of our licensing process in North Carolina. So that wasn't easy to do.
I'm sure it wasn't.
Underway.
Actually, I know North Carolina, 2 years ago, the State Board of Ed adopted the reading fundamentals test that had been developed in Massachusetts, because I had been instrumental in getting that licensure test, which is for K through 6 teachers, elementary, early childhood, and special ed, all have to pass that test. And North Carolina is one of 5 states now using that test.
Yes, we have also, part of the license exam also looks at general knowledge and content areas. So we're very pleased to say that's
good.
Well, has rolled out and it's coming along well. My question has to do with, this may be a dream that may never come true, but I am trying to get my hands on an example, either an example or some literature that defines the components of a high-quality standard. Maybe Marzano's work might be
There isn't any such thing.
Informing in that regard.
Because you've got to talk about what subject you're talking about.
Let's say,
I mean, that's what we've been saying here. History has a standard that's going to look different from a science standard, which is going to look different from a math standard, from an ELA standard, so that there's no component of, quotes, a standard in general. You've got to have a standard that goes with some particular discipline.
So what advice would you give this commission in terms of looking at other state standards? Because we don't have a wealth of time to examine indefinitely other
Can I
state
ask
standards.
a question?
Yes.
I thought you were just looking at Common Core and changing the...
English and math.
Now those are only two...
ELA and math.
Math.
Yeah, so as long as you can limit it to two topics, as ELA and math, then as the last discussion indicates that there are serious differences between what a standard is in ELA and in math, and that's absolutely right. But if there are only 2 of them, you have a chance.
I suppose I'm looking like, what should we look for as far as an ingredient in a standard? Do we look at some statement or some language around minimal mastery? Should that be part of the standard?
Do you know who's actually tried to contribute? At the Albert Shanker Institute, every year did a state of state standards, some sort of document that dealt for many years with standards. And at one point they came out with a document, what should a good standard look like? I can remember the pages where they showed that here were some standards in ELA that contained math. They showed some history examples where they contained actual history, not like that standard we saw up there, which was not a standard, historical events with blah, 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 blah. It could refer to anything at any point in time. History is chronological, and so you've got to bring in some specifics to understand what a standard is going to mean in terms of understanding what you're going to teach. But that's a problem with standards writers all over the country. They hadn't any idea at what level of specificity to write the standard. But the Shanker Institute came out, and there was they would evaluate state standards year after year as they were being developed, and this was in the late 80s, early 90s. I think they've stopped doing it, but I don't remember. They were doing a very quick job in terms of evaluating the content of each set of standards. But they did point to, here's what a good standard looks like, here's what a weak standard looks like.
Okay,
And
that's.
a good
very
standard would have content in it, and a weak standard would have just abstract generalities. Now, this may be different in math, but they were looking at,
Definitely,
they were
you do
looking
bring
at
up a point.
history and ELA. They were looking at the specificity of the standard.
Now, a very reputable mathematician, Steve Wilson at Johns Hopkins, was basically responsible for the math evaluations over the past 10 or 12 years in the Fordham Institute. And so for the math, I would trust what Steve does and what he says in terms of what was important in their evaluations and why they gave final grades the way they did. I would trust that totally, and that would probably give you a good basis for what answer your question, what makes a good math standard.
Thank you very much.
For math.
So the chair.
Yes, absolutely, just for math.
Okay, not for ELA,
Not
which was
for
a different
ELA.
document.
But I think we both agree that they really are different situations.
Oh, yes, every subject.
Of course.
Please.
In your evaluation of the North Carolina standards, are we looking at a total overhaul, or are there modifications that can be made given some of your recommendations that would bring them to a
You want to speak in math?
point?
Oh, again, I can speak in math, and in math, I was giving you a picture. All of the standards I quoted were standards from North Carolina. And verbatim, they're identical to the standards in Common Core. And what I said for Common Core, that is to say it requires a complete rewrite, I'm afraid holds for North Carolina as well.
I would say the same for ELA, and I've actually come up with a document that some of you may know about, dated 2013, based on the Massachusetts 2001 ELA standards. What you have to do simply is take a look at, side by side, at the nature of the statements that are called standards in one document, and then look at the nature of the statements called standards for what you have, and then ask teachers which they can use better that's teachable. Because part of the issue for ELA, particularly for the teaching of reading, is do you get a statement that doesn't have to be unpacked, but actually means what it says, can be taught to, is clear in its meaning. That was what we tried to do in Massachusetts, and it wasn't just me. I had people in reading and people in English language arts who could write, and we were trying to get clear statements that didn't require interpretation or unpacking. They simply required teaching, which was why, by the way, the Massachusetts standards didn't cost that much for professional development. They could be taught to right away. Nobody complained about needing a lot of help to understand these standards. Good English teachers know how to write English. I'm sorry, this sounds sarcastic, but I've worked with teachers in all disciplines, and I can tell you that good English teachers, if any group of teachers in a high school can write, they can, because they teach composition. They teach kids how to write. So if you ask a group of English teachers to look over a set of statements and fix them up, which they did in Massachusetts, like sharks going, for red meat there, blood. They're going to fix those statements up so they are clear, because that is what they're trying to teach kids when they write, how to write clear English sentences. So you should get a set of English standards that can be understood right away, that have some clear meaning. They don't need to be gone through layers of interpretation, and they don't require layers of professional development. They can be immediately taught to. So it didn't cost us that much to implement our standards. That's what the point is that I'm getting to, because they were standards. They were statements of objectives
So
that
are
were
you
clear.
essentially saying that the old Massachusetts standards would be something we should look at for English language arts as a.
Yes, or the 213 document, which is my boiled down version. We were ready to revise in 08, 09, and I did this work with department staff. And so I produced it on my own later, but it is a free, non-copyrighted document, and anybody can do anything they want with it. I mean, it's just there.
Is Massachusetts currently using the type of standards that you're talking about?
No, they went to Common Core because they were promised $250 million and race to the top line. I was on the state board, that's why I know what was going on.
They're sold too.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the State Board of Education that was making the decision, and we were told by the commissioner that Massachusetts was basically in line to adopt Common Core standards because there was a line of commissioners in other states that would immediately adopt Common Core if Massachusetts fell. I mean, this was the name of the game. We know what was going on.
Dr. Perks, can you address that? Because, you know, in your presentation, and I'm in no way, shape, or form trying, you know, attacking you, but you seem to suggest that it really doesn't matter what the standard is. It's about how the teacher or the ELA, or the LEA interprets that standard. And so Dr. Stotsky, what she is saying is that we need to be moving toward a content standard which is more specific about what the level of expectation is at that grade level. So can you address that?
Again, not an expert on standards in the writing of them. Again, the primary work we do is to support implementation, again, of whatever standards states have. So we have done this work with Common Core, with Next Generation Science, with state standards, a variety of other content area, with national standards around arts and music and those sorts of things. And some districts also have also used Dr. Stotsky's 2013. And really, in all of the work, one of the constants is teachers still need to get together to work to understand and use the standards to develop the curriculum resources. I have yet to have any standards that magically create that understanding in an individual or are written so clearly that a number of people sitting down together will come to the same conclusion. I've yet to see a set of standards. And I honestly don't think, in essence, the heart of the work isn't in finding that magical language. It's in really having teachers collaborate together to really know what the standards are asking them to do professionally.
But to Dr. Stotsky's point, you know, if we produce a set of standards that are clear to understand, why would they need so much professional development? I mean, you know, if they're coming out of, you know, their
They will always need some.
they will need some, but I don't understand, you know, the constant. When does a teacher have time to collaborate, to decipher the standard, and try to figure out what we're supposed to teach, and then we have to build a curriculum? That just, you know, it seems to me we're making it more complicated than it needs to be. That's all I'm. And I will say, just very quickly, I do, in the interest of full disclosure, you know, the company that you work for, West Ed, is a nonprofit organization, is that correct? Correct. And your funders are the United States Department of Education?
In regards to, again, I encourage you to go and the public to go look at West Ed's website.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm just saying, the majority of your funding comes from state, federal, and local governments. The rest of the funding comes from philanthropic organizations, including the CCSSO and Pearson.
So what, West
Just
Ed,
FYI.
So what is the
Before we
point?
answer that, I think in fairness, we brought you here for your expertise in subject matter that you provide. I don't want you to
Well,
be in a position of defending West
My
Ed.
point is, it's difficult to find people who are objective, and I'm not saying that you're not. I appreciate the fact that you've come here today and that you've given us this information, because it is helpful. But what I'm saying is, it seems as if every organization that we try to bring forward has some connection in some way, shape, or form to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
So in regards to Wested is a nonprofit, and as a nonprofit, focuses on research, development, and technical assistance to districts and schools across the country. There's a variety of grants and funding sources for the entire company to do that work, because that's the nature of nonprofits. So if you go to the website, you will see that there will be agencies and organizations that Wested works with across the political spectrum. Because again, we're nonpartisan, we're a nonprofit, really focused on one thing, supporting the equitable learning of children and adults. So we can, because of the nature of our work, you will find, and again, I encourage anybody to go to Wested's website. Our focus is in this case, helping teachers use the standards that are put into policy by their states. And in many states, they have the Common Core. So as a technical service agency, we've helped states learn, and teachers in those states learn to use those standards. So by the nature of what they have to do, we support them in implementing those.
But you can see how someone would draw the conclusion that because one of the organizations that developed Common Core, of which our state superintendent is now the president of CCSSO, and they received about $90 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you're here supporting the Common Core state standards, are you doing so because you're being paid to, or are you doing so because you believe in them?
So again, I'm not here to. Just a clarification point. I'm not here, and it was the first thing I said today, is I'm not pro or for. I'm not here to support or detract against the Common Core, just to really help bring a lens to the complexity of having teachers use and implement their standards well. And there's increasing research out there that implementation and the lack of implementation for whatever standards is absolutely essential. And if the goal is student learning, teachers really need support in meeting the promise of what the standards are asking them to do, whether it be Common Core or not.
And I think that's fine. Look, I apologize, I'm not here to put you on the spot anymore, and we're here to put any of our speakers on.
It's not necessary to apologize.
So,
Can I ask you a question about implementation? I think one of the things that I think several educators in the room would agree with me, the fact that from an implementation standpoint, we've been critical of the way that standards have been rolled out to us over time. So whether and states have been looking at standards for a long time, well before Common Core came on, and revising standards and implementing standards. What is an adequate amount of time for a state in the process of examining its standards, rolling out new standards, training teachers? What's an adequate amount of time from your experience and expertise in that field?
That's a really good question. I think it depends upon what level a district is functioning in regards to determining the effective implementation of standards. So I want to know first, to what extent are they already using standards? If they're at the lower end of that continuum, it's a significant amount of time and resources. For districts that have good familiarity with their standards, the curricular work can be dedicated time. So when you're talking about using standards to develop curriculum resources like scope and sequences and units of study, having some nice solid chunks of time, a lot of school districts will dedicate times in the summer where teachers can have sustained time to use the standards, organize them, and start developing the units of study. And the writing of the units of study takes the longest time. Once those resources are in place, it's really a matter of providing some continual time during a school day for teachers to, again, the standards help drive and become the engine of the work that teachers are doing around instruction, assessment, and analyzing student data. So the big resource there, and the question I would ask is, to what extent do the staff have the leadership and individuals in the school able to facilitate that work? So again, it's not, doesn't have to, for schools that are well organized and they can build that time for that collaborative work, they can really get up to speed very quickly. A lot of it really has to do with the culture in regards to how much of a school's culture is able to collaborate and how familiar they are with using the standards. So some schools can get rolling really quickly. A significant number of schools might need more.
So if I hear as experts here today, what I've heard is that this is a multi-dimensional process, that it's it takes a lot of time to do this and to roll this out effectively. How long did it take in Massachusetts?
Not necessarily. A lot of the conditions that were just mentioned are relevant. It could take 2 days, it could take 2 years. You could adopt a complete set of standards from elsewhere, say California's, which I'm looking at for grade 11, 12. They could be adopted by any high school teachers for grade 11 and 12 in any state if they're trained teachers and they've majored in English and they know what they're doing because they've got some experience. But if you're starting to develop standards from scratch, that takes more time because then you've got to go standard by standard. It's no longer necessary to do that. This is what I've been telling everybody. There are too many good examples out there, and they're all, almost all of them are public information if they were developed by states. All you have to do is start with something that's already been worked out, especially in math or science, where you want to know that there's been some vetting by experts, and then you know you've got a progression that may make sense already, or that the statements may be correct. It doesn't take that long. If you're working statements out for the first time, as we did in Massachusetts, 2 years, took a while because every statement had to go through layers of review to make sure that they were absolutely accurate, starting with a mathematician looking at them, then going to teachers at different grade levels to make sure they were at the right grade level. I mean, there's a lot of work if you're starting from scratch. And then, is this the right category? How many categories do you want? How do you want to organize the document? It takes an enormous amount of time if you're starting from scratch. But right now, any state that wanted to could overnight adopt Minnesota standards, as Professor Milgram mentioned, and I've heard Professor Lawrence Gray speak about not only the standards he helped to guide in Minnesota, but the test items that he personally has looked at, because Minnesota also uses its own test items.
I understand that, but here's my question to that. To me, that would seem to be to put us back in the same position that we would be in before, to where, because my understanding, the Charters Commission is to adopt standards that are good for the state of North Carolina. Not just a wholesale adoption of somebody else's work, because to me that is why we are this pickle here today, that we adopted another organization or entity's work and said this is what we're going to do.
In math, you would make
Well,
changes.
Let me say a word about math,
Sequencing.
because there I actually know something.
And the reason I say this is because I could see us doing that,
No,
and
but
two years later be back in the same
you
spot
can
here
do-
with another group of people
if you
sitting in
think
this room.
that in some
This is the same
sense
process.
or another, Common Core is appropriate. There were 4 of us in the Department of Mathematics at Stanford who were asked by the State Board of Education to take what was ultimately decided to be a very rough draft of standards that the board would refuse to accept, and said to us, take this as an outline and fix it. Took us 2 weeks. So what you can always do when you have high enough level people involved, you can always do is you can take standards like the standards you have and ask high enough level people, and a small number of them, it was critical that there were only 4 of us doing this, fix it, and you'd be amazed at how little time it takes.
English, you could do the same thing with high school English teachers who know what they're doing. And then you would tailor-make. You could take something from another state for, say, K to 5, reading, the teaching of reading. But when it comes to your literature standards, your own high school English teachers would know what to bring in from North Carolina. I've been waiting for states to do what Mississippi did, which was one of the best things I'd ever seen. They had worked out a syllabus of Mississippi-born or writers who had written about Mississippi, which turned out to be the richest American literature syllabus I'd ever seen. And that could be the basis for the entire high school literature curriculum that would bring in almost every major writer in this country, either born in or wrote about the state. So each state could have its own high school English teachers. Unfortunately, most of them have never been invited to write their own state literature standards. This I could tell when I reviewed documents. Most of them were never written by high school literature teachers.
Okay.
They were written by somebody else, but not.
So let me, so Jeannie, question from you, then I want to ask a question, then we're going to have to close this out and move to the next.
Okay, first of all, I kindly disagree with Jeff. I see no reason to reinvent the wheel, and if somebody's got a good set of standards that have been vetted by the experts, which Common Core never was, I see no reason. I would vote today to adopt your 2013 English language standards myself. And Massachusetts was given an A by Fordham, and California and Minnesota were given A's by Fordham in math and in their PLA. I've read Fordham's whole report. I have one specific question for you, Dr. Norton. In our high school math, we don't teach, we're one of the 5 states that don't offer the traditional math track versus the integrated math. We can only teach integrated math, which I think is a travesty, and is, in my opinion, the worst part of the Common Core in North Carolina. Would you briefly tell me your feelings about teaching math the traditional way and teaching it integrated?
Okay. It may surprise you, but I'll tell you what I really believe. So here's what I believe. If you have really competent, knowledgeable middle school teachers, by far the best way is integrated. You don't. You don't come close to having that level of competence in your teachers. Because of that, when you do what you did in North Carolina and give Math 1, Math 2, Math 3 as the middle school courses and drifting into high school, you are guaranteeing mediocrity. So for that reason and that reason alone, I'd strongly recommend at this time that you use more traditional curriculum. But I also strongly recommend that you get your teachers up to the level where they could advantageously use correct integrated courses, because that's a more natural, more convenient, and more efficient way of getting what the kids need to know in front of them.